Hello everyone and welcome back to Simplify. Today we're going to jump into a short tour of a house hack. Now if you're not familiar with house hacking, we'll get right into it throughout this video, so don't worry, but this is a shortcut to wealth building. House hacking for me has been one of the most effective methods of developing wealth. I'm going to share with you what I've done and hopefully give you some ideas about what you can do if you're interested in this type of lifestyle. So let's go ahead and go into the property. So during today's video, I'm going to be walking through this property. Hopefully you'll get an idea of what it looks like. I've done a lot of renovations here and I'm very proud of this property. I've been renting it out for over 4 years now, and it's been a very successful journey for me. So back in 2020, before COVID became a thing, I was searching for a property that I could both live in and rent out at the same time. I wanted at least a duplex situation, but preferably more units. It was also complicated by the fact that I didn't want to live just anywhere. I wanted to find a place that offered me a safe lifestyle and a place that I felt comfortable living. I've lived in a lot of different neighborhoods over the years, and at this point in my life, I value my safety and I want to make sure that my dogs are in a friendly environment. And on top of all that, I want to ensure that the neighborhood I live in has a prospect for growth. Real estate is all about location, in my opinion, and so buying in a neighborhood that's likely to grow in value versus those that tend to decrease in value over time is a very important decision that you make right at the beginning. As they always say with real estate, you make your money when you actually close the deal. And that to me has always been very true. Now, when I closed on this property, we had just entered into a full shutdown. This was in April of 2020. And so I had a lot of reservations. I was not sure I wanted to close this deal. I had an opportunity to back out of this deal, but I decided at the end of the day that I would go ahead and close and take my chances. I had the time to renovate the 2 units that are attached to the main unit. I wanted to experiment with this house hacking opportunity, and the numbers as they stood were going to work. I did a lot of calculations early on to make sure that I would both be able to cover a good amount of my mortgage, the property taxes, and incidental maintenance expenses that came up over time. I also had a large fund set aside for emergencies. I knew that, especially in this case with a home that was built in the 50s, that I would need to be pretty diligent about staying up on maintenance and repairs. So I made sure I had enough, in addition to the down payment, to cover these incidental expenses and to ensure that I wouldn't be upside down on the property. So I went ahead and closed on the property in April of 2020. I then jumped in to a property that was already rented to tenants. Now, if you all remember, lots of weird things were happening at this time. A lot of tenants stopped paying rent across the country. They weren't able to meet their rental agreements, and people were in really challenging living environments. Now, this was also a complicated time for landlords because they had the commitment to pay back the mortgages on their properties, but a lot of the tenants who were in those properties were either not able to make rent or simply just didn't pay rent. So I was a little leery of that, but fortunately I stepped into an opportunity where tenants were paying the rent. They continued to pay the rent through the durations of their lease agreements through me. I also had to experience a number of transitions. So all of the original tenants decided to move out in due time when their contracts were up. And so I was in the midst of COVID and had to make some decisions about how I would proceed. Now, I took on each of the 2 units that are attached to the main unit, I took some time to do renovations. I figured I have the time, I can build some sweat equity in these properties, and I can renovate. So I redid the kitchens, I redid the bathrooms, I actually redid the entire HVAC systems and the plumbing systems for each of the units. Now again, this property was built in 1955, and so it has a lot of older features and things that just tend to break over time. I wanted to make sure that the units were mostly up and running and without big costs in the future. So I built into my budget these expenses up front because I knew most of them were coming. Now I didn't know all of these expenses were coming. There were some surprises along the way. One in particular, which had to do with some pipes that had been completely eviscerated by roots from a nearby tree system. This was a very expensive fix and unexpected. In fact, I think it was closer to $20,000 at the end of all of the fixes that were necessary. This was a complete surprise. But aside from that, everything else panned out exactly as planned. Now, you might be asking, is this even possible in 2024 going into 2025? And I would argue that it is. There are still certain locations that have opportunities like this. This is a very unique home in that it was built as a large single-family home, but subdivided into a triplex. This is not the only way that you can house hack, though. If you have an open room, if you have any space that you're willing to rent out, if you have a casita, which is basically a small adult dwelling unit, something that's outside of your property that you can rent on a short-term basis, that's an opportunity. There are many ways to go about house hacking. In my case, I do long-term lease agreements for each of these two units, and I prefer finding tenants that are stable and that work with the environment, that actually like being here and allow me to live a more comfortable and regular lifestyle. I could make more money, no doubt, doing short-term rentals. Airbnb is a possibility here. We also have a great traveling nurse program, and so I've considered those types of rental options. But at the end of the day, the taxes for those are higher and the work is also higher. I also live on site. I'm here every day. Now, that's challenging for lots of reasons because I run into my tenants frequently. If there are problems or disagreements or tensions, this can be problematic. I've been very lucky. I've had wonderful tenants, and mostly this has to do with a much more elaborate screening process that I make everyone go through. Of course, I follow all of the local laws and regulations, but I make sure to screen my tenants very thoroughly. I call references, I verify information, and I make sure they're a good fit. I make sure they can afford the property. I don't just rent out to anyone, and I especially don't cut corners with income. I want to make sure if you're going to live here that you're able to afford it comfortably and that it makes sense. And so my criteria is high for a reason. If that means I have a longer period of vacancy between tenants, I'm okay with that. Fortunately, I've never had a very long period of vacancy. This most recent tenant who just moved out, this was my longest vacant period. It was just over a month. It was right in the middle of winter. The timing was really odd, and I had a ton of interest. I just didn't have a lot of qualified applicants. And so I waited until I found the right applicant for the property. Now, this makes my life easier because I have to live with these individuals for a year. At the very least, most tenants are staying 2 years. I've had one who's stayed the entire time. She's now hit 4 years. And so I encourage you, if you are interested in this type of living, that you establish for yourself a due diligence process to vet tenants and to make sure they're a good fit for your living situation. Now, again, I want to point out that this isn't the only way to do it. I have friends who rent out a room in their home on a short-term basis, and I have friends who rent out a room in their home on a long-term basis. And both are very happy with this decision. Now, finally, I'll say, has this been a successful wealth building opportunity for me? Unequivocally, the answer is yes. I have been able to cover large amounts of the mortgage, the property insurance, the property taxes, and incidental expenses, maintenance expenses, through the rental income that this property generates. It's not that I couldn't afford the property without that, but it's much more comfortable to afford it with the help of others living in this property. In addition, at some point, I could always change this property to be a larger single-family home. But as long as my space needs are not growing and I'm comfortable in this environment, I plan to continue renting this property out for the long term. Now, ultimately, if I wanted to build a real estate empire and really be involved in just rentals, I would choose something that offered me more units and that could be scaled more easily. This is not a situation that can be duplicated very easily, and it's also not a situation that I would want to contract out to property management. One, because I live here, I want to be heavily involved in the tenant screening process. But two, because really to have property management involved, you need to have more units. That's when it starts making sense to pay a certain fee to a management company. When you just have 2 units and you live on site, it really is a lot to take out of your pocket. In some cases, this fee is 10%, 5% to 10% is pretty standard. I don't really want to give up 5 to 10% of my monthly rent just to get help when I need to find a tenant. Of course, you'll want to check your local market. You want to make sure that you're offering your rentals at a fair market value, and you'll want to be a good landlord. You want to take care of your property, you want to fix things quickly, and make sure that your tenants are happy. This is a way to live in synergy and make the relationship work. It goes both ways. You need to be good to your tenants if you expect them to be good to you. Now, lots of people ask me, do I feel secure in this situation? Are there ever times where I feel like having other people live so closely to me is a problem? And I would say absolutely not. Again, I'll point to the fact that I do a very thorough screening of tenants, but you also don't know who the person really is until they're living here. I've been very lucky. Someday this might change, but so far, so good. I've been able to develop lots of wealth by having this situation in my life. It's certainly not the most convenient, and a lot of times I find myself wanting to be in my own house without anybody near me. I don't like getting those calls late at night. My toilet's backed up, my laundry unit is no longer working, and I've gotten them. I guarantee you I've gotten many of those calls. But we've worked through most of the kinks over the last 4 years, and I'm in a pretty good position now. So for the most part, this property runs on its own. I keep it up as best I can. I do work between tenants. I make sure that everything's in nice operational condition, and the rest I don't think about very much. So if you're interested in house hacking and you have questions, or if you'd like to see a deeper dive into this property, into how I made this decision, what the numbers look like, put a comment below. Let me know that this is something you're interested in. You have to be focused on the long term to accept some of the sacrifices that this type of living situation incurs on your lifestyle. But if you're committed to those goals and you've established them clearly in your mind, then this is not a big sacrifice at all. In fact, you feel very fortunate every day, as I do, to be living in a situation where I can be in a beautiful home, in a beautiful environment, and I have help from others to pay for it. And ultimately, it will be my property once it's all paid for, all things are said and done. But again, it's not without its sacrifices. You have to be willing to work, and you have to be willing to sacrifice. If you've gotten any value from this video, please give it a like below. Subscribe to the channel. I'd love to see you in the next video. If you have questions, recommendations, or you want to learn more about this property, again, let me know, and I'd be happy to dive deeply into the numbers. Thanks again. Hope you have a great week, and we'll see you in the next video.